I was in the Mount Hood National Forest in late October, doing a solo overnight I had done maybe 6 times before. I knew the timberline loop well enough to be cocky. The weather report said clear skies, low 40s at night. I packed light, too light, because I wanted to make good time. Around 3 p.m. I saw a stack of stones off the main path, a cairn, and then another 20 yards deeper. Someone had tied faded orange flagging tape to a branch. My brain told me it was a shortcut back to the loop. My ego told me I could handle it. I followed it for maybe half a mile. The pines got taller and closer together, and the light turned that thin green colour you get when the canopy eats the sun. The flagging stopped. The cairns stopped. My phone had 1 bar, then none. I turned around and realised I couldn't see my own footprints in the pine duff. Everything looked the same. I told myself to stay calm, find water, find a ridge, follow it down. Basic stuff. I had a filter, a ferro rod, a mylar blanket, and about a litre left. Not great, but survivable for one night. By 5:30, the temperature was dropping fast. I found a small creek and filled up. That's when I heard it the first time. A voice, faint, calling my name. "Hey, over here." It sounded exactly like my younger brother, Milo. He died in a car accident 4 years ago.
I froze with my hands in the freezing water. I knew it wasn't real. Grief does weird things when you're alone, but my chest still locked up. I shouted back, stupidly, "Milo?" My voice bounced off the trees and came back wrong, too quick, too flat. I decided to move, not toward the voice, but downhill, toward where the creek should meet the Salmon River. Night came on like someone dimming a switch. I couldn't risk walking in the dark and breaking an ankle, so I found a fallen Douglas fir and started building a lean-to against it with branches. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the ferro rod to spark. While I was feeding the first little flame, I heard the voice again, closer this time, from behind a stand of pines to my left. "You cold? Come this way, it's warm." Same tone Milo used when we were kids camping. Same little laugh at the end. My stomach turned over. I didn't answer. I just kept my eyes on the fire and kept feeding it twigs. The forest at night isn't quiet. It cracks and settles. But this was different. Every time the wind moved, it carried little pieces of conversation that weren't mine. A woman humming. A man saying, "Wait." Then Milo again. "You're gonna freeze out here, idiot." Around midnight, my fire was low and I was out of dry wood within arm's reach. I had to choose between letting it die or going 5 steps into the dark to grab more branches. I chose the dark. I took 3 steps, crouched, grabbed a dead limb, and when I stood up, there was something standing between me and my fire. Not close, maybe 30 feet, just at the edge of the light. Tall, too thin, shoulders hunched. I couldn't see a face because the head was tilted down, but the shape was wrong, like a person made of sticks wearing a wet jacket. It didn't move. It just mimicked the crackle of my fire perfectly, a soft popping sound coming from where its mouth should be. I backed up, hit the log, fell on my ass, and scrambled back to the lean-to.
I threw everything I had on the fire and it flared up. When the light hit the spot again, it was empty. For the next 4 hours I didn't sleep. I kept the fire alive by burning my map, then the cardboard from my protein bar box. Every 20 minutes or so, the voice would come back. Always Milo, always helpful. "There's a cabin just over the ridge. Follow me." "You're going the wrong way, man." At one point, it got angry when I ignored it. "You left me. You left me there." That one almost broke me, because that's what I told myself for years after the accident. Dawn in a cold forest is cruel. It gives you light, but no heat. I was dehydrated, my lips were cracked, and my legs were numb. I kicked out the fire, packed my wet blanket, and started moving downhill for real, using the sun through the trees to keep east. About 2 hours in, I stumbled onto something man-made. Not the cabin the voice promised, but an old Forest Service shelter, half collapsed, roof caved in on one side. Inside, on the back wall, someone had carved names and dates going back to the 1970s. And fresh, maybe days old, carved in shaky letters, "Don't listen." Underneath that, in the dirt, were 3 small cairns, just like the ones that lured me off trail. I understood then. Whatever was out there didn't hunt by chasing. It hunted by calling. It learned the voice you wanted to hear and used it to keep you walking in circles until the cold did the work. I didn't stay. I took a bearing off the shelter's metal sign, which still had TR486 stamped on it, and I bushwhacked straight south for 3 brutal hours, falling through salal bushes, crossing the same creek twice, until I heard the distant hum of Highway 26. I followed that hum until my boots hit gravel, and a logging truck driver picked me up, shaking so hard I couldn't get my seatbelt on. The rangers later told me people get turned around there every fall. They find them sometimes a 1/4 mile from the trail, curled up under a tree. No injuries, just hypothermia. A few of them are found with their phones still recording, and on the recordings, you can hear a familiar voice calling them deeper in. I still hike. I just never follow cairns that aren't on my map, and I never answer when the forest says my name.
I didn't go into the forest to get lost. I went to prove I still could be a lone dot. IT was the whole rainforest in October. It were Green Cathedral on the Olympic Peninsula, where the moss hangs a foot thick and everything smells like damp earth. I had a 3-day loop mapped, trailhead to 5 Mile shelter, cut over to the old trapper's cabin, back out along the river. I was carrying a 35-pound pack, a good tarp, a ferro rod, and that stupid confidence you get from watching too many solo hiking videos. The fog came in around PM on the first day. Not a slow roll, but a wall. 1 minute I could see the trail markers. The next everything was the same flat grey-green. I checked my phone for the GPS track, and it was dead from the cold. I told myself to just keep heading downhill, because water finds the road eventually. I didn't find water. I found a deer trail that looked like a human trail, and followed it for maybe an hour. When I stopped, the trees were too close, the moss too undisturbed. No boot prints but mine. That's when I heard it. 3 notes whistled. Up, down, up. I froze and actually smiled, because another hiker meant a trail. I whistled back the same 3 notes. I called out, "Hey, I'm off trail." The forest gave it back to me. Exact pitch, exact pause. My own voice, but thinner, like it came through wet wood. "Hey, I'm off trail," not an echo. An answer. I built my first shelter because the light was going, and I was already shivering. I found a fallen spruce, leaned branches against it, piled ferns and moss on top. It wasn't good, but it was dryish. I got a fire going with birch bark and my last dry tinder, boiled creek water in my titanium cup. At half a protein bar, night in the hoe is not quiet. It drips, it creaks. At about midnight, the temperature dropped hard and my fire sank to coals. I coughed once from the smoke. From maybe 20 feet out in the black, something coughed back. Same wet, single cough. My blood went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the air. I fed the fire until it roared, kept my knife in my hand, and didn't sleep every time I shifted. The thing shifted every time I breathed out hard. It breathed out hard. It was learning me. Day 2, I decided the only rule that mattered was downhill and wet. Find the whole river, follow it out. I marked trees with my knife, little arrows pointing back to camp. I drank spruce tip tea for the vitamin C, chewed the needles until my mouth was raw pine. Around noon, I found the first carving on an old cedar, chest height. Someone had cut a face, not art. A circle with an open mouth, eyes wide, then another, then 10 of them, all facing the same direction. Deeper into the forest, the cuts were old, black with age, but the wood inside one was still pale. Someone had refreshed it recently. 50 yards past that I found a deer, a young buck, hung by its hind legs from a low branch with strips of its own sinew, fairly opened clean, not eaten. Not by bear, not by cougar, displayed. The meat was still pink, so maybe a few hours old. The whistling started again behind me. 3 notes. Then my own voice from yesterday. Hey, I ran. That was my mistake. I burned calories I did have, sweated through my base layer. And when I stopped, I was panting and lost, and the trees looked exactly the same. I checked for my knife marks. Nothing. I had been herded that second night. I did everything right because panic finally turned into procedure. I didn't build on the ground. I found a thicket of young hemlocks, wove the tops together, made a hammock nest about 4 feet up. I kept a small fire going underneath, not for warmth but for light. I didn't eat. I melted water and sipped. I talked out loud to myself to stop my brain from filling the silence. It came at about MI. Didn't see it at first. I saw the absence of trees moving, then the firelight caught skin the color of wet birch bark. Almost translucent. It was tall, too tall, with arms that hung past where knees should be. Its head tilted when I breathed. It didn't have a mouth I could see at first, just a dark slit. Then it whistled. Up, down, up. Then it used my cough. Then it said, in my exact tired voice, help. Not asking for help, offering it, like bait. I threw my burning stick at it. I screamed, actually screamed, which you're not supposed to do because it wastes energy. It made a sound back that wasn't a mimic. It was a screech like metal on wet bark. Furious that I hadn't come closer. It backed out of the light on all fours, joints bending the wrong way, and vanished. I didn't sleep. I counted my heartbeats until dawn. Day 3, I was in real trouble. My feet were white and numb at the toes. My hands shook so bad I couldn't strike the ferro rod on the first 5 tries. I was talking to myself constantly. I found my own boot, print from the day before, full of rainwater, with the little notch in the heel I knew was mine. I had walked a perfect circle, maybe a mile wide. That's when I understood survival wasn't about walking out. It was about stopping the thing that wanted me to walk. I picked the biggest cedar I could find near the creek, one with low branches like a ladder. I climbed 15 feet up, lashed myself to the trunk with paracord, and built a little platform of dead limbs. I took everything flammable I had left. My alcohol stove fuel, a spare sock soaked in it, my map. I waited. Dusk came early under the canopy. The whistling started far off, circling. It tried my voice again. Hey. Then it tried a lullaby my mom used to hum when I was a kid. One I realized I'd been humming under my breath for 2 days without noticing. It had been listening that long. It came to the base of my tree and looked up. In full light. I wish I hadn't seen it. The mouth was a vertical split that opened wide when it whistled. The eyes were just dark pits. It put those 2 long hands on the bark and started to climb, slow, patient. I dropped the burning sock. It hit its shoulder and caught. The thing lit up like dry moss. It didn't scream. It whistled, that same 3-note call, but now it was fast, panicked. A dozen voices layered on top of each other, none of them human. It fell, thrashed in the ferns, and bolted into the dark. Still burning, I stayed in that tree until the sun was fully up, shaking so hard the branches shook with me. I climbed down and just walked straight downhill through Devil's Club and nettles. Not caring about noise, I hit the Hoe River in 20 minutes. I followed it downstream and hit a locking road less than half a mile from where I'd been circling. A road crew found me at M on my 3rd day. They said I was hypothermic, dehydrated, and had early frostbite in 3 toes. They said they'd heard whistling out there for years and told new guys not to answer it. The ranger who filed my report wrote, disorientation due to exposure, probable auditory hallucination. He wasn't there. I still hike, not alone, not anymore, and every time the wind moves through pine needles just right. Up, down, up. My shoulders lock up before my brain even remembers why. Because something in that forest survived by learning how to sound like rescue. I should not have survived that swamp. The search and rescue team found my backpack hanging from a dead cypress tree 3 days after I had disappeared. They found my footprints leading into the marsh, but they never found any footprints leading back out. To this day, nobody believes what happened to me in the forests of Louisiana. The police said I became disoriented. The rescue team blamed exhaustion. The doctors said trauma can make people see things that aren't there. Maybe they're right, but every night at exactly 17 a.m., I wake up to the sound of wet footsteps outside my bedroom window, and sometimes I can smell swamp water, even though I now live nearly 1,000 miles away. My name is Ethan Carter, and this is the story of how I survived Blackwater Marsh. It happened 3 years ago. I had always loved hiking and exploring remote wilderness areas. I'd spent years camping in national forests across the United States and considered myself experienced enough to handle almost any situation. So when I heard about a massive stretch of swampy forest in rural Louisiana called Blackwater Marsh, I wasn't intimidated. Locals warned me about it. They talked about strange lights floating over the water at night. They told stories about hunters hearing voices calling their names from deep inside the swamp. Several people even claimed hikers had disappeared there without explanation. I laughed it off. Every town has its ghost stories. I figured Blackwater Marsh was no different. I was wrong, very wrong. The morning started normally. The weather was clear, and I followed a marked trail through towering cypress trees draped with Spanish moss. For the first few hours, everything seemed fine. Then sometime around late afternoon, the trail disappeared. One moment, I was walking on a narrow dirt path. The next, I was standing knee-deep in dark water. I checked my GPS.no signal. My phone struggled to connect. No signal there either. I turned around to retrace my steps. But the trail behind me was gone, completely gone. The forest suddenly felt different. Too quiet. No birds. No insects. No distant animal sounds. Just silence. Then I heard it. Splash. A single splash somewhere behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Only dark water and twisted tree roots. A few seconds later, another splash echoed from my left, then another from my right. Something was moving around me. Slowly, carefully, watching. I picked up my pace. The water became deeper with every step. The sun began sinking below the trees, casting long shadows across the swamp. That's when I noticed something strange. A broken branch shaped like a hook. A fallen log covered in pale fungus. I had seen both of them before, about 20 minutes earlier. My stomach dropped. I was walking in circles. Panic started creeping into my mind. I forced myself to stay calm, find shelter, wait until morning, then find a way out. Simple. At least that was the plan. A few minutes later, I spotted an old cabin sitting on a patch of dry ground in the middle of the marsh. It looked abandoned. The wooden walls were rotting. The roof sagged dangerously. Most of the windows were broken. Still, it was shelter. I waded toward it. The closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. The cabin didn't feel abandoned. It felt occupied. Not by a person. By something else. Something watching. I pushed open the front door. The rusty hinges screamed. Inside, the cabin was empty. No furniture. No personal belongings. Nothing except mud covering the floor and footprints, fresh footprints. Bare human footprints. They led into a small back room. But there was something wrong. The footprints only went in. They never came back out. I followed them. The back room was completely empty. No closet. No trapdoor. No hidden exit. Yet the footprints ended in the center of the room, as if the person who made them had simply vanished. That night I barely slept. Around midnight I heard footsteps outside. Slow, heavy, splash, splash, splash. Something was walking through the swamp, circling the cabin. I looked through a crack in the wall. At first I couldn't see anything. Then a figure emerged from the darkness. It was tall. Far too tall. At least 7 feet. Its arms hung unnaturally low. Its skin looked grey and wet. Moonlight reflected from its body. The figure stopped directly outside the cabin, then slowly turned its head toward me. I dropped to the floor. My heart nearly stopped. The footsteps ceased. Silence filled the cabin. Then came the scratching. Long nails dragging across the exterior wall. Slowly, patiently, searching, whatever was outside knew I was there. And it was waiting. Morning couldn't come fast enough. The moment sunlight touched the trees, I ran. I didn't care where. I just wanted out. Hours passed. My water supply was nearly gone. My legs ached. And every now and then, I caught glimpses of a tall, grey shape moving between the trees. Always watching, always following. Never getting closer. Never falling behind. Then I saw something hanging from a tree branch. My backpack. I froze because my backpack was supposed to be on my shoulders. I looked down. It was gone. I had no memory of taking it off. No memory of losing it. Yet there it was, hanging neatly from a branch. The zipper slowly opened on its own. A foul smell drifted out. Inside was nothing but black swamp water. I backed away. Then I heard a voice. Ethan. My blood ran cold. It was my mother's voice. But my mother had died 6 years earlier. Ethan, help me. The voice sounded closer. I refused to turn around. Every instinct told me not to. The voice continued. Closer, closer, until it sounded like someone was standing directly behind me. Breathing, waiting, then the voice changed. The familiar tone vanished. It became deeper. Raspy, inhuman. I ran. Branches whipped across my face. Mud pulled at my boots. The thing chased me through the swamp, not physically, but with voices. Dozens of voices. People crying. People screaming. People begging for help. Then, just before sunset, I saw smoke rising through the trees. Real smoke. I stumbled toward it. A campsite sat on a patch of dry ground. An old man was sitting beside a fire. His name was Walter Jenkins. At least that's what he later told me. He looked at me calmly. As if he had been expecting me. You saw it, he said. I nodded. What is it? I asked. Water stared into the flames. Finally, he answered. Nobody knows. He paused. But people have been disappearing in these swamps for over 100 years. He explained that local legend spoke of something that lived in the marsh, something born from fear, isolation, and death, something capable of mimicking voices and memories, something that used people's grief against them. That night, we stayed awake beside the fire. The sound started after midnight. Footsteps, splashing water, whispers, children laughing, women crying, voices calling our names. Water never reacted. He simply stared into the fire. Before sunrise, he stood up. We leave now. As we walked through the swamp, he gave me one rule. No matter what you hear, don't turn around. For hours we pushed forward. Then the voices returned. My mother's voice, my father's voice, friends, strangers, people screaming for help. The sounds became overwhelming. Then came the footsteps, hundreds of them, splashing through the water behind us. Getting closer, faster. My entire body wanted to turn around. But I didn't. Water didn't either. Then suddenly the trees ended. Sunlight flooded across an empty highway. We had made it out. Relief washed over me. I turned to thank Water, but he was gone, completely gone. No footprints, no sign he had ever been there. Just the road and the forest behind me. Search and rescue teams found me wandering along that highway later that evening. Nobody believed my story. Maybe they shouldn't, because there's one detail I never told anyone. When investigators eventually recovered my backpack from the swamp, they found a photograph inside. The photograph showed me asleep in the cabin. Someone had taken it during the night. Standing in the doorway behind me was the tall grey figure, smiling, looking directly at the camera. But the most terrifying part was the date printed on the photograph. It was taken 7 days before I ever entered Blackwater Marsh. 3 years have passed since then. Yet every year, on the anniversary of my escape, muddy footprints appear outside my house. They led straight to my bedroom window, and every single time, there are no footprints leading away. Now, every night at exactly 17 a.m., I wake up to the sound of wet footsteps outside. Splash, splash, splash. And sometimes, when I look at my bedroom window, I can see a tall grey figure standing just beyond the glass, watching, waiting, as if it's finally ready to finish what Blackwater Marsh started.